And one more to add, the Conservative candidate in the Montreal riding of Laurier-Saint-Marie says he's now been dropped by the party. That candidate, Stéphane Marquis, says a review of his social media posts led to the decision by the Conservatives. Well, to talk about this, we're now joined by Michele Cadario, CEO of Vanguard Strategy, a former national campaign director for the Liberals, Cheryl Oates, principal at GT, most recently the campaign director for the Saskatchewan NDP, and Jordan Paquet, vice president at Blue Sky Strategy Group, was deputy campaign manager for the PEI-PC party in the last provincial campaign. Hello to all three of you.
Hello, Michael.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. So listen, I'm going to ask us first and foremost to do a compare and contrast, beginning, with Paul Chiang, because Mark Carney did defend him before he eventually dropped out of the race. Up against that, Mark McKenzie, who was dropped by the Conservatives, and now another candidate in Stéphane Marquis dropped by the Conservative Party. I'm wondering, Cheryl, I'll get you to start us out. I'm wondering if the Liberal leader failed to demonstrate leadership on the issue of Paul Chiang, given what the Conservatives did with their own candidates.
Well, to this point, Mark Carney has been mostly untested when it comes to stuff like this. He hasn't had to manage a caucus. He hasn't really had to manage a cabinet. So this was sort of his first opportunity. When you're faced with mounting pressure from the outside, when you're faced with a member on your team doing something that the public sees quite unanimously as wrong, what do you do? And I will say, I do kind of respect the fact that rather than just give in to public pressure and say, this guy's got to go, that Mark Carney looked at this more holistically. Granted, what Mr. Chiang said was wrong. I'm not saying that there's any wondering about that, but Mark Carney took it holistically and said, does this one thing discount this decades-long career and demonstrated judgment on this issue in other areas? And he decided to take the hit on it. He decided to say, despite mounting pressure, I'm going to continue on with this candidate. Now, unfortunately for him, the next day, the candidate themselves said that they would no longer seek the seat. So Mark Carney took the hit. He decided it was worth the distraction day after day on the campaign, and all that political capital wasted for nothing when we talk about politics.
Yeah, Jordan, what do you say? Did Mark Carney fail to demonstrate leadership?
Of course. This was a tale in two campaigns. This story broke on Friday. It came up on Saturday. I think I predicted that if he didn't make a decision, he was going to come to regret it quite quickly. Come Monday morning, he was still standing by the candidate, said he has his full confidence, he's going to continue the campaign, dismissed any questions about it. And then once RCMP investigation comes to light, he changed his mind, or the candidate resigned. To Cheryl's point, he is untested in these particular situations, and I think on this first big test of leadership, he failed. When you're a leader and you're presented with the facts of a case, they probably had much more of a background on this as well. He was faced with a decision. He chose to wait it out for whatever reason. We don't know. I think he just thought that the news cycle would bury. It didn't, and they lost a couple days in the campaign for it, rightly so. And now they've really lost any high ground that they have on anything about foreign interference, because anytime it comes up again, they'll just bring up this scenario, or they'll bring up Chandra Arya.
Yeah, and people did point to this is a clear case of foreign interference that is happening because it originated with this bounty from the PRC. Michele, what do you say to that question?
Yeah, it was a miss by the campaign. I think that it was a mistake for Mr. Carney not to disturb him. Perhaps it can be attributed to not necessarily having those political instincts that are honed after years and years in politics, but it cost him a few days. Now, do I think that it's something that's going to blemish him overall? No. And I think that the Conservatives did a very quick, after they've been kind of out there hounding somebody, they certainly had to go back and try and scrub their own circumstances and look at, all of a sudden something that was said 2 months ago that apparently passed muster with the Conservative campaign back then about hanging or setting Mr. Trudeau for a death penalty. All of a sudden that wasn't okay today. So, I think that it's on days like this in the campaign, you have to make quick decisions, and where you would normally like to have people be able to state their case in a court of law and all that, and have a more fulsome discussion. Campaigns are quick, and you have to make quick decisions. And then this one, he lost a little bit of ground over these last few days.
Okay, let's talk about Conservatives now, because you reference quick decisions there, Michele, and right now there are Conservatives who want to see a quick change of the direction of the campaign for Conservatives, and in fact they think the campaign strategy has to be thrown out. They think the person who's leading the campaign needs to be replaced, some Conservatives at least. Take a listen to what we heard to Pierre Poilievre when he was pressed on the issue of his campaign manager, Jenny Burns, yesterday.
The threats, the unjustified threats by President Trump, further strengthened the argument in favor of the Canada First agenda that I've been fighting for my whole life. And so we will continue, despite calls to the contrary, to talk about those things, even if I am the only leader in the country that offers any change.
Okay, so Pierre Poilievre sticks to the tried and true script rather than answering a question about whether or not there needs to be a change in his team. But does the Conservative campaign need a change right now, given the fact the momentum seems very much on the Liberal side? Cheryl, I'll ask you to start us out.
This is a really interesting question, because I understand the calls from outside, especially when things aren't going the way that you hoped or the way that you had planned. It's really easy for people on the outside to say, well, you're doing something wrong. You should have done this when you did that. Looking at this campaign for me, across the board, like we know the ballot box question right now is who's best to take on Donald Trump. And in every piece of polling we have seen, publicly available polling, the Canadians by far across the country prefer Mark Carney on this issue. So why would Pierre Poilievre try to win this question when right now, even amongst persuadable Conservative voters, but they believe that Mark Carney is best positioned to take on Donald Trump. So Poilievre is doing what he can do. His problem is not his messaging, in my opinion. The problem is that the Conservative persuadable universe is just too small. So although they have a ton of support right now, the ceiling of people who are willing to consider voting for this party is really low. So the game is not, should we position ourselves as who's best to take on Donald Trump? The game is, can we keep our people committed and motivated? Because right now they have that more than the Liberal Party has. And can we continue to get them to turn out? Can we have them come out and vote more than we can have the Liberals turn out and vote? And that's why you see them doing things like rallies and continuing to stick to their message, because that is what their base is passionate about. And if more of their people turn out than the Liberals, the election day is going to look a lot different than the polls.
Michele, what do you say? Do you think Conservatives need to change their direction when it comes to strategy?
Well, I'm certainly not going to dissuade them from going about the strategy that they're taking on right now. But I think that this really just reminds me of, last summer and in the lead up to the campaign, where, I and many other Liberals were saying that the Liberal government isn't speaking to Canadians where they are. And so that, I think, is why Mr. Poilievre did so well then. And right now, in the midst of this campaign, I think that that's what he's facing. He's not speaking to Canadians in terms of what their view is, what they think is the most important issue facing the country. And until he can do that, I don't know that he's going to be considered in that head-to-head. If indeed, Mr. Trump continues to pop up at different times, and we know he's coming up tomorrow again with tariffs, then that is going to be a constant in this campaign, because it's a constant in Canadians' lives. It's a constant in Canadian families' lives, concerns for their future, concerns for their families, and concerns for jobs. And so you have to be meeting people in the moment, because that's what this election is all about, as much as Mr. Poilievre might wish otherwise.
Jordan, as a Conservative, what do you think?
Sure. Look, there's always people in a campaign, outside of a campaign that want to take some snipes and some shots when they're outside looking in. That's normal in any campaign. I wouldn't expect anything different. At the same time, the Conservatives have a plan. They have the most candidates nominated. They have the most money. Their ground game is spectacular. We've never seen the types of crowds in any election campaign, certainly in my lifetime, that I can remember that are even at this stage or any point in the campaign that are actually coming out to see this. So there's that energy, there's that enthusiasm that's there. And in the policies, these are things that they've been well thought out about how do we build Canadian resiliency. They've been thinking about this since the first Trump term. When Poilievre came in, he really tried to put his own stamp on it, develop it further. So it's not just about who can go and deal and who's best to fight with Trump. It doesn't matter who's going to talk about negotiating trade deals with him after he just rips them up anyway at the end of the day, Donald Trump does. So we have to talk about how do you build a more resilient Canada, the Canada First plan, and that's what they want to talk about. about, as well as who's best to represent that change. I think if the election does finally get down to change, we've seen
the issue of change rather
issue of change, absolutely, change in affordability, and who's best to deliver that after what the Conservatives are calling the last decade of darkness, or the lost decade, whatever we want to call it.
Okay, well, you and your friends might want to call it that. I appreciate you trying to share that here. But listen, we're out of
That's my own stamp on it.
That's your standpoint. That's just why you're invited.
Yeah.
Cheryl, Michele, Jordan, thank you for this today.
Thanks.